Imagine building a treehouse in your own backyard only to have the police show up because your new neighbor thinks you don't belong there. Have you ever experienced one of those days when everything finally seems to be going right? That was how Jake Thompson felt on that Saturday morning. He had his work gloves resting on the passenger seat, a receipt from the local hardware store still stuck to the dashboard, and a back seat filled with lumber for the treehouse he had promised his kids 2 summers ago. His wife Emily was inside preparing lunch, and the weather was perfect. Clear skies and warm air, the kind that makes your plans feel achievable. Jake pulled into his driveway on Maple Street, just past the corner by the old elementary school. It was a peaceful neighborhood in Riverton, Iowa, where single-story homes lined the streets and neighbors often waved to one another. Jake appreciated that. He liked to keep a low profile, focus on his family, and mind his own business. As he stepped out of his truck, wearing scuffed boots and jeans dusted with sawdust, he didn't initially notice her. Across the street, partially concealed behind a scraggly hedge, stood a woman with her arms crossed and chin tilted slightly upward, watching him intently. Jake glanced over and offered a polite nod, but she didn't acknowledge him in return. He shrugged it off, thinking, maybe she's new, not everyone is friendly right away. With that, he hoisted a couple of planks over his shoulder and headed toward the backyard gate. "Excuse me?" Her voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding, as if she were accustomed to being obeyed. Jake turned around, a bit taken aback. "Yeah?" She strode across the street with purpose. "What are you doing over there?" He blinked in confusion. "Pardon?" "This house. Who are you working for?" She pressed. Jake, trying to maintain his composure, replied gently, "Because the owners... Actually, I am the owner. My name is Jake Thompson. I live here." She stared at him, her expression one of disbelief. "That can't be right." With a slight exhale, Jake explained, "Ma'am, I live here with my wife and 2 kids. We've been here for going on 6 years. Her eyes narrowed skeptically. No, I've walked this neighborhood almost every evening since I moved here. I know who lives where." "Well, I've been walking my own lawn since 2018, he said, attempting a friendly smile. "Maybe you just missed me." Still, she didn't smile back. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." Jake chuckled nervously, not quite understanding the gravity of the situation. "You're joking, right?" "No, I'm not," she replied, shifting her stance as if preparing for a confrontation. "There's a suspicious individual trespassing. He says he owns the house, but I don't believe that's true." "Suspicious?" Jake echoed, his tone flattening with disbelief. "My name is Karen Miller," she declared, as if it carried weight. "And I'm not afraid to act when something seems off." Jake glanced toward the front window where his daughter Lily stood watching, her small hand pressed against the glass. He took a few steps closer to Karen, trying to remain calm yet firm. "You need to hang up the phone." She flinched but continued speaking. 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a possible break-in. A man in a hoodie is unloading things into a backyard. No, I don't believe he lives here." The last comment hit Jake hard. He had heard stories like this before but never imagined he would become part of one. Not in this house, not with his kids watching. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Emily. He answered quickly, keeping his eyes fixed on Karen. "You okay out there?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just a neighbor being curious." But Emily, sensing the tension, replied, "I'm coming out." "No, stay inside with the kids," Jake insisted, ending the call and leaning against the tailgate of his truck, waiting for the police to arrive. He chose not to run or yell, but what neither he nor Karen expected was how quickly the sirens would arrive and what the officers would do next. As the first cruiser rolled up with lights flashing but no siren blaring, a second car followed closely behind, then a third. Jake remained by his truck, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, while Karen stood off to the side, phone still in hand, her lips moving as she relayed information to the operator. The door of the first cruiser opened, revealing Officer Mark Johnson, a stocky man in his early 40s, with calm eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses. He surveyed the scene, a man standing quietly by his vehicle, a woman gesticulating as if directing traffic. "Are you the one who made the call, ma'am?" he asked Karen. "Yes, that man is trying to break into the house over there," she asserted. Officer Johnson turned to Jake. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" Jake nodded, trying to keep his composure. "Sure." As Officer Johnson approached, the door of the second cruiser swung open. Out stepped Officer Lisa Green, a tall woman with a commanding presence and an observant gaze that seemed to miss nothing. Her eyes locked onto Jake, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Jake Thompson?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah, we met at the community cleanup last fall, right?" he replied, confused. She nodded. "That's right, the recycling seminar." Karen's expression shifted from doubt to shock. "Wait, what?" Officer Johnson raised an eyebrow and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, can you explain again why you believed he didn't live here?" "He said he owned the house, but I've been walking this neighborhood and I know who belongs here. He doesn't." Officer Green interjected. He does? I've met his family. Karen's mouth opened then closed again, struggling for a response. Ma'am, Officer Johnson said, flipping open Jake's ID. We're taking the word of a legal document issued by the state. Jake handed over his driver's license, gesturing toward the mailbox where the Thompson family name was painted, in cheerful colors on a wooden sign made by his children. Karen's eyes darted to it, perhaps for the first time noticing its significance. Officer Green walked over to the porch, peering in through the screen door where Emily stood with Lily, who waved shyly. Officer Green waved back, then turned to Karen. Are you new to the area? She asked. Last month, Karen muttered, her confidence waning. Officer Green nodded knowingly. Maybe next time you could ask questions before calling 911, especially when it comes to your neighbors. People live here. They raise families here. They work hard to feel secure in their homes. I just thought. I know what you thought, Officer Green replied quietly. That's the issue. A heavy silence settled over the group. Officer Johnson handed Jake back his ID. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir, he said, maintaining professionalism. Jake accepted it with a sigh. I appreciate how you handled this. His tone carried a weight, one that reflected the exhaustion of having to confront such an incident. Karen stood frozen, her posture deflated, realizing she had made a very public mistake. What happened next would change everything, as a bystander across the street had been filming the entire encounter. From behind a curtain in a nearby house, Larry Dawson, a retired teacher with a penchant for recording life's moments, had captured the scene on his phone. Initially thinking it was a break-in, he quickly recognized the faces involved. He and Jake weren't close, but they had exchanged friendly waves in passing. And now, Larry had a recording of the confrontation, complete with Karen pointing, the officers engaging, and Jake standing there with a mix of dignity and frustration. Larry didn't post the video right away. He wasn't that kind of person. Instead, he sent it to his son, who taught middle school in a nearby town. His son shared it on a local community page with a simple caption, "This is Jake Thompson. He lives here. Watch what happens when someone assumes he doesn't." The video spread rapidly, and by Sunday morning it had garnered thousands of shares. Comments flooded in from across Iowa and beyond, expressing anger, sympathy, and shock. Meanwhile, Jake remained oblivious to the online storm, spending his day inside, cutting strawberries for Lily's lunch and striving to keep the earlier incident from seeping into the rest of his day. But as the sun set, he found himself sitting on the back patio with Emily, their feet resting on the low brick wall he had built the previous summer. She handed him a cup of chamomile tea. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. "Not really." "Okay." After a moment, he finally spoke. "I keep thinking about Lily. She saw everything. You know? Me with that woman and the police. She asked if you were in trouble." Emily nodded, and Jake continued. "That's what bothers me. Not what Karen said, not even the police, but that my daughter had to witness it. At just 5 years old." As they sat together in silence, the sounds of their neighborhood at night enveloped them, offering a moment of respite from the day's events. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her dimly lit kitchen, her phone buzzing with texts she couldn't bring herself to answer. Friends and family had sent her the video, each message echoing the same sentiment. "You might want to see this. What were you thinking?" Unable to ignore it any longer, she finally clicked play, watching herself on the screen. As she observed her own actions and the calm demeanor of the officers, something shifted within her. It wasn't enough to change everything overnight, but it was enough to let discomfort seep in. Taking a deep breath, she poured herself a glass of wine, sinking into silence, aware that her actions had set off a chain of events that would ripple through the community. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect, consider sharing it. Engage in conversations about these important issues. Don't let moments like Jake's fade away. Change begins with dialogue, so be part of that conversation. Jake stood by his truck, trying to comprehend the situation unfolding before him. As Officer Mark Johnson approached, he remained calm, though a sense of disbelief washed over him. Karen Miller, the woman who had called the police, stood off to the side, her arms crossed tightly, still clutching her phone. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Sir, can I speak with you for a moment?" Officer Johnson asked, his voice steady and reassuring. "Sure," Jake replied, trying to mask his rising anxiety. He stepped forward, leaving Karen behind, who was still fuming and gesturing animatedly on the phone, her words tumbling out in a rapid stream. Officer Johnson gestured for Jake to follow him to the side of the vehicle. "I just need to ask you a few questions to clarify the situation." "Of course," Jake said, his heart racing. He couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized, as if every move he made was under a microscope. "Can you tell me what's going on here?" Officer Johnson inquired, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I'm just trying to build a treehouse for my kids," Jake explained, his frustration creeping into his tone. "I've been living here for 6 years. My wife and kids are inside. That woman over there," he nodded toward Karen, "doesn't seem to believe I belong here." Officer Johnson nodded, taking in the information. "Okay, I understand. I'll need to verify your identity and ownership of the property." "Sure," Jake said, pulling out his driver's license and handing it over. He felt a mix of humiliation and anger. He had never imagined his weekend project would lead to this. Meanwhile, Officer Lisa Green turned her attention to Karen, who was still on the phone, describing Jake in a manner that made him sound like a criminal. "Ma'am, can you explain again why you felt it necessary to call the police?" she asked, her tone firm yet calm. Karen hesitated, her confidence faltering as she faced the officers. "I just thought something was wrong," she stammered. "He looked suspicious, unloading things into a backyard." "Suspicious?" Officer Green echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Do you know this man?" "No, but I've walked this neighborhood for weeks, and I know who lives here," Karen insisted, her voice growing more defensive. Officer Johnson, glancing at the ID in his hand, interjected. "He does live here. We're taking his word and legal identification into consideration." He turned to Jake, who stood with an expression of quiet dignity, even amidst the chaos. "Thank you, officer," Jake said, trying to maintain his composure. "I just want to be left alone to build this treehouse for my kids." "Understood," Officer Johnson replied, handing the ID back to Jake. "We appreciate your patience. Ma'am, I suggest you verify who your neighbors are before making such calls in the future. It's important to foster a sense of community rather than suspicion." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, but she remained silent, the realization of her actions settling in. The atmosphere shifted as the officers exchanged looks, sensing the tension in the air. As the situation began to de-escalate, Jake heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. His neighbor, Larry Dawson, had pulled out his phone and was filming the interaction from a distance, curious about the commotion. He had lived on Maple Street for years and was known for documenting local events, but this was something he had never expected to capture. "Everything okay over there?" Larry called out, trying to gauge the situation while still maintaining a respectful distance. Jake turned toward him, grateful for the support, but also aware that this moment was being recorded for all to see. "Just a misunderstanding," he replied, trying to keep his tone light, despite the weight of the moment. "Good to hear," Larry said, nodding. He continued filming, capturing the awkward silence that followed as Karen stood with her arms crossed, now visibly uncomfortable. Officer Green, sensing the need to wrap things up, turned to Karen. "Maybe next time, instead of jumping to conclusions, consider talking to your neighbors first. Building trust is crucial in communities like this." With that, Karen nodded slowly, her expression shifting from defiance to regret. Jake felt a sense of relief wash over him as the officers prepared to leave, the crisis averted, but the underlying tension still palpable in the air. As the police cruisers rolled away, Jake took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety that had gripped him. He glanced back at his house, where Emily stood at the window, concern etched on her face. He could only imagine how this incident would impact their family and their sense of safety in the neighborhood. Though the confrontation had concluded, Jake knew that the repercussions of that day would linger far longer than the sirens that had come and gone. In the aftermath of the tense encounter, Jake Thompson returned to his home, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions. The police had left, but the weight of the incident lingered heavily in the air. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the familiar sights and sounds of his family. Emily was in the kitchen preparing lunch, while their daughter, Lily, played quietly in the living room with her dolls. The normalcy of their home felt like a stark contrast to the chaos he had just experienced. "Jake, are you okay?" Emily asked, glancing up with concern etched on her face. "I saw the police cars outside. What happened?" "It was just a misunderstanding," Jake replied, trying to sound calm. "A new neighbor, Karen, called the cops on me because she didn't believe I lived here. She thought I was breaking in." Emily's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "What? That's ridiculous. You've lived here for years." "I know," Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But it's not just about her not knowing me. It's what she assumed about me just because of the way I look and what I was wearing. It's infuriating." Lily peeked around the corner, her big eyes filled with curiosity. "Daddy, were you in trouble?" she asked innocently. Jake knelt down to her level, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just a neighbor being a little confused. Everything's fine now." As Jake tried to reassure his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled over him. The idea that someone could view him as suspicious simply because of his appearance cut deeper than he expected. He had always prided himself on being a good neighbor and a dedicated father. Yet in that moment, he felt reduced to a stereotype. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen Miller sat in her dimly lit living room, grappling with feelings of shame and regret. The buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts, and she glanced at the screen to see messages flooding in from friends and family, all referencing the video of her encounter with Jake. Each notification felt like a weight pressing down on her, reminding her of the poor judgment she had displayed. "Karen, you might want to see this," one text read. "What were you thinking?" She hadn't been prepared for the backlash that came with being publicly exposed. Unable to ignore it any longer, Karen finally clicked on the video. Watching herself on screen, she felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. The tone of her voice, the certainty with which she had made her accusations, it all felt foreign and uncomfortable now. It was as if she were watching a different person entirely, one who had allowed fear to cloud her judgment. As the evening wore on, the video began to circulate rapidly on social media, capturing the attention of the local community. By the next morning, it had garnered thousands of views and shares, with comments pouring in from all directions, some supportive of Jake, others critical of Karen's actions. The response was overwhelming, and Karen realized she had become a focal point for a larger conversation about race, assumptions, and community. At work, Jake faced a barrage of messages from colleagues who had seen the video. Some expressed their support, while others seemed uncertain about how to approach him. When he walked into the break room for his usual coffee, heads turned and conversations halted. There was an awkward mix of respect and pity in their eyes, which only added to his discomfort. "Hey, Jake," his manager Sarah said softly, pulling him aside. "I just wanted to check in on you. I saw the video. Are you doing okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, though he felt anything but. "Just trying to process everything." Sarah nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. "The mayor's office reached out to me. They want to feature the footage in a community forum about neighborhood trust and race relations. Would you be willing to speak?" Jake was taken aback. "You want me to be the face of this incident?" "I think your perspective could really help people understand," she said earnestly. "You didn't ask for this, but it's become part of the public conversation. Maybe sharing your experience could make a difference." Jake contemplated her words. He hadn't signed up to be an advocate, but perhaps there was a way to turn this painful moment into something constructive. Meanwhile, Karen was bombarded with messages from friends and family, all urging her to reflect on her actions. "You need to apologize," one message read. "You can't just let this go." As the day wore on, both Jake and Karen found themselves at a crossroads. They had both experienced the fallout of assumptions and misunderstandings, but how they would choose to respond next would shape not only their lives, but also the fabric of their community. Jake felt the weight of his daughter's innocent question lingering in his mind, and Karen grappled with the realization that her actions had consequences far beyond her initial fears. In a world where assumptions often led to division, both were now faced with the possibility of bridging the gap and fostering understanding in their neighborhood. As the days passed, the aftermath of the incident continued to reverberate in both Jake Thompson's and Karen Miller's lives. Jake found himself reflecting on the events of that fateful Saturday, replaying the confrontation in his mind like a haunting echo. The weight of it all became increasingly difficult to bear, not just for himself but for his family, especially for his young daughter Lily. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, Jake sat down with Emily on their back patio, the sounds of the neighborhood settling into a familiar rhythm around them. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow in the sky, but the tension of the past week still clung to him. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily asked softly, sensing the turmoil within him. Jake sighed deeply. "I keep thinking about what Lily saw. She witnessed me being treated like I didn't belong in my own home. How do I explain that to her?" Emily reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "You can't control how others perceive you, Jake, but you can teach her about resilience and understanding. You can show her that we have to be better, for ourselves and for others." "I know," he replied, staring into the distance. "But it's frustrating. I've lived here for years, worked hard to be a good neighbor, and yet all it took was one moment to make me feel like an outsider." Meanwhile, across the street, Karen was grappling with her own set of emotions. The video of her confrontation with Jake had gone viral, and she was now a subject of intense scrutiny. Friends and family had reached out, urging her to reflect on her actions and the implications they carried. Sitting in her living room, she replayed the video over and over, each viewing deepening her sense of regret. One night, she finally mustered the courage to reach out to her sister, who had been particularly vocal in her criticism. "I messed up, didn't I?" Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, you did," her sister replied gently. "But the important thing is what you choose to do next. You have to take responsibility for your actions." Taking her sister's advice to heart, Karen began drafting a letter to Jake. She wanted to apologize, to express her remorse for the assumptions she had made and the fear that had driven her to call the police. It was a difficult task, but she knew it was necessary. As she wrote, she reflected on her own biases and the societal constructs that had shaped her perceptions. "I didn't ask questions," she penned. "I let my fear dictate my actions instead of reaching out to you as a neighbor. I can't change what happened, but I want to learn from it." Simultaneously, Jake wrestled with the idea of speaking at the community forum. He had been hesitant, unsure of how to articulate his experience without letting anger overshadow his message. But as he thought about Lily and the lessons he wanted to impart to her, he realized that this was an opportunity to foster understanding and dialogue. When the day of the forum arrived, Jake stood nervously in front of a small audience, including the neighbors and local officials. The atmosphere was tense, but he took a deep breath and began to speak. "I didn't choose to be part of this conversation, but I believe it's necessary. We need to recognize that our assumptions can be harmful, and we must strive to understand one another." As he shared his story, he felt a sense of empowerment wash over him. He spoke about his experiences as a father, the love he had for his family, and the importance of community. The audience listened intently, and he could see nods of agreement and understanding. Across the room, Karen sat among the audience, her heart racing as she listened to Jake's words. She realized how crucial it was for her to be there, not only to understand the impact of her actions, but to also show her commitment to change. When the opportunity arose for questions, she stood up, her voice trembling. "I want to apologize, Jake. What I did was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry for how my actions affected you and your family." The room fell silent, and Jake turned to face her. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the weight of her remorse. "Thank you, Karen," he replied, his voice steady. "That means a lot." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about the two of them. It was about the entire community coming together to confront biases and build a more inclusive environment. Both Jake and Karen knew that their journey toward understanding had only just begun, but this was a significant step forward. As they left the forum, a sense of hope lingered in the air. They understood that by acknowledging their experiences and learning from each other, they could contribute to a community that embraced empathy, understanding, and growth. The days following the community forum brought a newfound sense of reflection and growth for both Jake Thompson and Karen Miller. After the emotional exchange at the forum, Jake felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The support from his neighbors and the chance to speak about his experiences had empowered him to reclaim his space in the community. However, the healing process was just beginning. As Jake returned to his daily routine, he found himself more attuned to the nuances of his interactions with neighbors. He made a conscious effort to greet everyone he met, hoping to foster a sense of camaraderie and trust. Each smile and wave felt like a small step toward rebuilding the sense of belonging he had once taken for granted. For Karen, the experience had been equally transformative. After publicly acknowledging her mistake, she felt a surge of motivation to embrace change. The moment she had stood up at the forum to apologize to Jake had been a turning point for her. It was no longer just about her. It was about creating a more inclusive environment not only for herself but for everyone in the neighborhood. Determined to make amends, Karen decided to host a small gathering at her home to foster better relationships with her neighbors. She envisioned it as a way to bring everyone together, to share stories, and to begin healing the rifts that had developed. She spent days preparing, ensuring that her home was welcoming, and that there would be plenty of food and drinks to share. On the day of the gathering, Karen felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. As the sun began to set, neighbors started to arrive. Jake and Emily were among the first to step through the door, greeted by the aroma of freshly baked goods and the cheerful sound of laughter. Karen welcomed them with a warm smile, her heart racing as she realized the significance of this moment. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice slightly shaky but filled with sincerity. "I really appreciate everyone being here tonight." As the evening progressed, the atmosphere lightened. Neighbors mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Jake found himself in conversation with Larry Dawson, who recounted amusing anecdotes from their neighborhood's past. Emily chatted with Karen about their children, and for the first time, Jake felt a sense of normalcy returning. Eventually, Karen gathered everyone's attention to say a few words. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know that my actions have caused some tension in the neighborhood, and for that, I am truly sorry. I've learned a lot from this experience, and I want to do better. I hope we can all move forward together." Jake felt a swell of appreciation for Karen's vulnerability. "Thank you for putting this together, Karen. It takes courage to own up to our mistakes, and I respect you for that," he replied, his voice steady yet warm. The crowd nodded in agreement, and a sense of camaraderie began to blossom. As the conversations flowed, the barriers that had once existed started to dissolve. Neighbors who had previously exchanged only polite nods began to share their experiences, fears, and hopes for the community. As the night drew to a close, Jake found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all together. The incident that had initially felt like a fracture in his life had led to an opportunity for dialogue and connection. He realized that while they could not change the past, they could shape the future through understanding and empathy. Karen, too, felt a sense of relief and hope. The gathering had been a success, and the warmth of community filled her heart. She understood that building trust would take time, but this was a significant first step. As the last guests departed, Jake and Emily walked home hand in hand, their hearts lighter than they had been in weeks. They both recognized that the road ahead was still long, but they were committed to fostering a community where everyone felt seen and heard. The experience had taught them both that change begins with accountability, openness, and the courage to confront one's own biases. Together, they would continue to build a neighborhood defined by kindness and understanding, where every resident could thrive. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere on Maple Street began to shift. The gathering hosted by Karen had sparked a newfound sense of unity among the neighbors. People who had once exchanged only polite greetings now engaged in meaningful conversations, sharing stories and experiences that had long been overshadowed by assumptions and misunderstandings. Jake Thompson felt a sense of hope as he watched the community transform around him. The treehouse he had built for Lily stood proudly in the backyard, a symbol of not just his dedication as a father, but also the resilience of their neighborhood. It had become a gathering place for children, drawing them in with the promise of adventure and imagination. Jake often found himself sitting on the porch, watching as laughter and joy filled the air. One Saturday afternoon, Jake decided to organize a neighborhood cleanup day. He wanted to build on the goodwill that had emerged from Karen's gathering. He created flyers announcing the event, inviting everyone to come together to clean up their shared spaces and improve the community. The response was overwhelmingly positive. On the day of the cleanup, neighbors gathered with trash bags and gloves, ready to make a difference. As they worked side by side, conversations flowed easily. Jake chatted with Larry, who had brought his son along to help. "It's great to see everyone out here," Larry remarked, picking up litter near the park. "I feel like we're finally becoming a real community." "I know what you mean," Jake replied, smiling as he watched Lily play with the other children. "It's amazing how one incident can lead to so much change." Meanwhile, Karen joined forces with Emily, and together they organized a bake sale to raise funds for local charities. The community had been so supportive during their difficult times, and they both wanted to give back. As they prepared pastries and treats, Karen felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to contribute positively to the neighborhood she had once disrupted. As the bake sale day approached, excitement filled the air. Neighbors rallied to support the cause, bringing baked goods and helping set up tables. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, and Karen couldn't help but smile as she watched everyone come together for a common goal. On the day of the bake sale, the street was bustling with activity. Children ran around, their laughter echoing as they played games, while adults mingled and enjoyed each other's company. Jake and Emily set up a booth, proudly displaying their homemade cookies and brownies. The sale was a success, raising more money than they had anticipated. As the event wrapped up, Jake took a moment to address the crowd. "I just want to say how grateful I am for all of you. This neighborhood has become a place where we can support each other, where we can grow together. Thank you for being part of this journey." The applause that followed was heartfelt, and Jake could see the smiles on his neighbors' faces. It was a moment of connection, a recognition that they were all in this together. In the weeks that followed, the friendships forged during the cleanup and bake sale only deepened. Neighbors began to host regular potlucks, where everyone brought a dish to share. These gatherings became a staple of community life. We,